After numerous refusals to speak with News 10 about his department's use of a high-tech surveillance device called a Stingray.
We've dealt with your incessant badgering of our department over these issues.
This is a privacy issue.
We were forced to find Sheriff Scott Jones in public.
Hey, Sheriff.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Doing very well.
I'm Thom Jensen with News 10. We want to talk to you about your use of Stingrays.
We contacted Jones before a recent Sheriff's Academy graduation, and when we asked him about Stingrays, his demeanor changed.
Are you proud of disrupting an Academy graduation?
That's why we're talking to you before.
This is why we are so concerned about who uses Stingrays and how they use them. Stingrays are traveling cell towers controlled by law enforcement agencies. They are so powerful, they force all cellular devices in up to a mile radius to connect to them. And they can download all of the data coming into and going from the phones and tablets connected. It's a real concern for civil rights groups who say police and sheriff's departments use this spy technology and refuse to divulge how or even if they use it.
There's a lot of secrecy about the use of these devices.
Hani Fakori is the head of a nonprofit group trying to stop the use of high-tech surveillance equipment on large groups of people, especially when that surveillance is done without judges' approval and defense attorneys being informed.
We've been assured and promised that they're not being used in that way, but we don't really know for sure.
During our investigation, it became clear the Sacramento Sheriff's Department couldn't get its story straight about using Stingray technology.
Originally, it gave us an invoice from the maker of the device, the Harris Corporation, showing the department bought a high-powered antenna that extends the range of Stingrays. Then it said, quote, "This technology comes with a strict non-disclosure requirement. It would not be appropriate for us to comment." And finally it said, more documents from the Harris Corporation, quote, "exist that were not disclosed." The department's attorney said the sheriff didn't have to give us the records and cited all sorts of public records exemptions, including a state law written to protect railroads.
We fully comply with the Public Records Act. We've given you documentations that were responsive.
Well, one of the quotes from the attorney was something that had to do with rail safety, which has nothing to do with Stingrays.
Are you proud of disrupting an Academy graduation?
That's why we're talking to you before.
The secrecy about the devices starts with the Harris Corporation, which forces every agency purchasing a Stingray to sign a non-disclosure agreement, which states the device's capabilities are not for public knowledge. The sheriff has been more secretive than others. We obtained Oakland Police Department records showing it used a Stingray for all sorts of criminal investigations. And when the San Jose Police Department applied for a federal grant to buy a Stingray, it said it consulted with the Sacramento Sheriff's Department about its use of Stingrays.
We found that especially odd because the court administrator's office told us they asked every judge whether or not they approved warrants for the use of Stingrays, and every single one said no. The district attorney's office told us the same thing. The sheriff's department never divulged it was using a Stingray or a like device for any criminal investigation.
I also went through more than 1,000 warrant applications filed over the past 2 years at the Sacramento County Courthouse. Not a single one ever mentions the use of Stingrays. There are a few for pen register or trap and trace warrants. Those allow agencies to collect incoming and outgoing numbers from a single cell device. But it's only from those designated devices, not from people in a wide area like a Stingray does. And there are dozens more warrant applications which have been sealed with no explanation of why they are confidential or even which agency applied for them.
If you're using Stingrays, I think there are some questions about that.
Then this interview can be over.
But the judges and the DA even said that they didn't know that you had one of these devices. Why is that?
I have nothing more to say to you.
We reached out to the sheriff's department after that interview and asked if he'd rather sit down and talk to us in a more formal setting, but once again, he declined to be interviewed. Dale and Christina?
You know, law enforcement officers and prosecutors usually work together as a team, and isn't it shocking that prosecutors and judges don't even know when the Stingray is being used, in what cases?
And we can't say exactly what's going on here, but I can tell you there's a story out of Florida right now where there are accusations that the U.S. Marshal's office has trained detectives there in Florida to basically say that they're using confidential informants when they're really using Stingrays. This is by no means a scientific study, but we thought we'd just go ahead and drive around Sacramento and see for ourselves if the system that's set up to help people with true disabilities have better access to parking is being abused by able-bodied drivers, and if it is, how bad is the problem?
Just inside the city limits, on the bricks of old Sacramento, the search for a parking spot can be difficult, especially if you have access needs. 4 days in a row, I drove through Old Sac looking for the placards. Nearly every day, the same cars and trucks are parked in the same disabled parking spots with placards displayed in the windshields. Then there's this woman.
Worst parking ever. Oh well.
By looking at her, you wouldn't guess she's mobility impaired. But she told me after 40 years as a grocery cashier, her knees are bad. And sometimes it's hard to get around.
But it's just easy for me to do the handicap, you know, so I take advantage of it when I can. Because I can, you know.
The first 3 days I visited Old Sac, I saw this man parking in the same spot with his placard.
I was run over by a truck 4 years ago. Some days I can walk, some days I can't.
And getting the placards and the permission to park just about anywhere 24/7 wasn't hard for either one.
Yeah, I really think it's easy to get.
Applications are simple to find on the DMV website. Fill them out, get a doctor to sign off and say you medically need better parking access, file the papers, and the placard is as good as yours. The numbers in California make you wonder if a lot of people aren't gaming the system. An annual average of 2.5 million placards for 22 million drivers. That's one placard for every 8.8 drivers.
When these people who are committing fraud on the system take up a disabled spot, they're taking that spot away from a wounded veteran, someone who's elderly, or someone who is disabled and genuinely needs it.
State Assemblyman Mike Gatto, a Democrat from Los Angeles, introduced a bill earlier this month aimed at curbing the abuse.
It would require the DMV to go back to households that have placards and take them back from people who shouldn't have them.
Very close to the Assemblyman's Capitol office, 3 out of 4 cars have placards. Of the 39 cars and trucks they found parked around the state appellate court and state treasurer buildings, 31 had disabled placards. Only 8 didn't.
Do you guys do these undercover?
Catching drivers who really don't have disabilities is nearly impossible, according to DMV investigative team supervisor Tom Edwards.
It's tough. You can't always see people's disabilities.
Last year, DMV investigators wrote 577 misdemeanor citations for disabled placard abuse. But those were mostly for counterfeiting placards, forging doctors' signatures, and using someone else's placard.
So most of our investigations are going to be concerning individuals using them or misusing them in the field.
For now, we'll have to rely on the honor system with doctors and drivers to protect this special access for the truly disabled and level the playing field for Sacramento drivers searching for parking spots. Do you think there's abuse out there that people might be abusing it?
Yeah, a lot.
Anytime that somebody takes one of these spots away from someone with a disability, they're not only hurting the system, but they're hurting that person tremendously.
One of the ways Assemblyman Gatto says his bill would help level that parking playing field is by allowing cities and towns to start charging people with the placards the regular rate for metered parking, thus taking away the incentive for a lot of people to get the placards when they don't really deserve them. In Sacramento, Thom Jensen, ABC 10 News. It's not dangerous if it's not disturbed, but our whistleblowers say they used hammer drills like this one to pulverize holes through concrete and plaster walls and ceilings that could contain asbestos. And they say the dust that they created blew everywhere, including into air conditioning and ventilation systems. It happened dozens of times inside Wellman Hall, according to 7 UC Davis employees who filed whistleblower complaints, and hundreds more times in other lecture halls that were built before 1980. By state and federal law, those older structures have to be treated as if they contain asbestos because they likely do.
And they were aware of the fact that asbestos was in those buildings.
As shown in this UC Davis Campus News article, Wellman was evacuated in 2011 because asbestos may have been released when someone inadvertently turned on a building fan. UC Davis records obtained by News 10 show testing in 2 Wellman classrooms in 2013 did find asbestos in in wall texturing and joint compounds above levels which OSHA considers safe. The testers also said the rest of the walls in Wellman should be considered as containing asbestos-containing construction materials. In their complaints, Mark Kellogg and the other workers say they were ordered to drill the holes at Wellman, even though their managers knew there was a high probability they would be exposed to asbestos.
The management team stood up and stated they're going to be testing for asbestos. Drill the holes now so we don't get shut down.
The crews work for the Campus Academic Technology Services Department. They install, tear out, and replace things like projector screens, TV monitors, and sound equipment.
What was coming down on your face?
Dust, piles of dust and debris just comes down. You're coated with it. You're completely covered with it.
So asbestos potentially everywhere?
Everywhere, yes.
Kellogg, a co-worker, and 5 other student employees told me students were attending summer classes at Wellman and other buildings on campus while they drilled their holes. During the summer heat, the ventilation system and air conditioning units were turned on while they worked.
So the entire room is filled with dust. The air handlers are on, the dust is going in the air handlers, is blowing all over the building.
We also, to keep ourselves, cool in there, we had a fan, and that was probably blowing stuff all over the place.
The whistleblowers also told me they drilled in Olson Hall and were never informed about these test results, which also found asbestos in wall texturing on concrete throughout the building.
There's a security fence and caution tape up outside Olson today, but that was not the case when I was here a couple of weeks ago. And I walked right through a set of open double doors back there and into what a worker told me was an ongoing asbestos abatement project. Did they find asbestos in this room?
He explained how the floor tiles have asbestos, as do panels glued to the walls.
These are made of panzite. Panzite is asbestos.
The materials had already been disturbed when I was there, and within an hour, the crew began cleaning the air with powerful filtration systems. A manager at the abatement company told News 10 he's investigating what happened. He referred all other questions to the university. And an assistant vice chancellor who oversees construction and architectural issues at UC Davis said he's been assured no safety regulations were violated.
And you feel like what's happening over there now at Olson is safe?
From what I've seen and talked to the consultant about it, yeah.
As far as the whistleblowers go, UC Davis Assistant Vice Chancellor Clayton Halliday said he was never briefed on their complaints before our interview.
And the HVAC equipment was running. It was summer. It was hot. I mean, that gets up into the vents and could be blown all over the students.
Well, again, I'm listening to what you're telling me, but I don't have firsthand knowledge of that.
We sought the advice of an expert. Cal OSHA's asbestos unit manager also could not specifically talk about the workers' allegations, but in general terms, he said, if their claims are true, they may have been exposed.
I wouldn't think that you would be doing damaging masonry, concrete type material without first determining what's in it.
Jeff Farrell worked in the asbestos cleanup industry before joining Cal OSHA. He said safety regulations for abatement workers are specific and strict.
The guys that are coming in to do the work, they're going to be wearing respirators, they're going to be wearing protective suits, there's going to be air monitoring every day to make sure that the quality control is there, that the work's not being done inappropriately.
Monitoring was in place at Marac Hall, where another asbestos abatement project is also currently underway. Without knowing exactly where the asbestos is located, I can't say whether workers at either location were in danger of being contaminated because they wore no protective gear. But UC Davis's own health and safety policies state that employees will be informed in writing the locations of asbestos in their work areas, and that they are not to drill holes in asbestos-containing materials or access areas above ceilings. The whistleblowers say they have little doubt that they were exposed along with an unknown number of students.
Are you afraid for your life?
I took it home with me on my clothes. I could expose my children too.
The really sad part is that I created it. I drilled the holes under order of my management to create that dust. That I've got to live with the fact that, I potentially poisoned hundreds of kids just to save my job.
By the way, they're not suing. They simply want the policies and procedures put in place that will keep themselves safe along with the students. There are policies on campus, as we just showed, but they say that those were not enforced and they were never told about them before they drilled in these walls. They've got a patient on a bed with IVs hooked up that they're bringing out right now. This is an extremely volatile situation. I haven't seen anything like this. I got to talk about this right now, though. This is right behind the hospital, you guys. This is a mobile home park completely flattened by fire. We've got firefighters in here trying to save what they can. But if we move over to the left here, Henry, you can see this is what they're battling. These mobile homes went up. We do know that some of the explosions were coming from here, possibly propane tanks. Those explosions we heard earlier. This entire mobile home park, dozens and dozens of people's homes are just flattened here. We've got firefighters actually trying to tear into that airplane right now. We've got federal investigators from the FAA on the scene here right now. They're trying to get them into there so they can look at the equipment, see exactly what happened. But preliminary indications are, and the reports are, that it sounds like there was some sort of equipment malfunction and then a failed attempt to scramble back to the airport. The season was closed down, at least shortened last season several times, and the crab pots left on the docks like they are here today. But without safety concerns this year and favorable water conditions, the crabs were back in the water and the catch was on in a big way this season. And there were literally, I believe, probably hundreds of officers out here in Berkeley today, and it did get violent for a while. We were right in the middle of it. Now they're watching for tonight because we know in the past when that black bloc group was here, violence did occur. There was some vandalism downtown. They're hoping that does not happen again tonight. We're live in Berkeley. Thom Jensen, NBC Bay Area News. At least 40 to 50% of all the firefighters in the state are on this fire right now. And this red Cadillac sports car just zoomed by them on the left at well over 100 miles per hour. And she says what happened next was unlike anything she has ever seen.
And investigative reporter Thom Jensen put every hospital in a 13-county area under the microscope.
I can tell you this assignment was a challenge. The California Department of Public Health does not make it very easy to see the health of your local hospitals. But we obtained the records, and after watching this report, we'll show you how with just a click of the mouse, you can compare hospitals before you or a loved one checks in.
In 2011, 64-year-old retired firefighter Tyrone Lee walked into Memorial Medical Center in Modesto for a common procedure. He needed gallstones removed.
He was just going in for, minor surgery.
His brother, a retired homicide detective, expected Tyrone to be home in just a few short hours. But he didn't hear a word until later that night when his family called.
My older brother had called me and said, hey, Tyrone's in the hospital, in intensive care, he's brain dead.
What happened to Tyrone is documented in this report from the California Department of Public Health. 8 bladder stones were removed after an uncomplicated surgery. Post-op, during a gurney ride back to his recovery room, 3 workers held Tyrone in place because he was thrashing. He was given the drug propofol to calm him. Tyrone stopped breathing 60 seconds later.
Well, you go in for a simple operation, all of a sudden you're brain dead. What happened?
In Tyrone's case, the state says he was not breathing and without oxygen for approximately 17 minutes. The records show that no one called a code blue, an urgent alert to hospital staff that a patient needs immediate resuscitation. A career malpractice attorney filed this lawsuit on behalf of the Lee family.
The nurse screamed at the doctor 3 times, according to the report, do you want a code blue? Do you want a code blue? Do you want a code blue? And a code blue was never called.
11 days later, Tyrone was pronounced dead. His family claims if someone would have just looked at his medical chart, they would have seen Tyrone has sleep apnea. And in order to keep his airway open and breathe, he needed to be upright, not on his back.
It was just a matter of that he didn't read the charts. And that's
something so simple.
So, yeah, very simple. Read the charts and you'll know that, he's got to be, almost straight up.
Sutter Health owns Memorial Medical Center. They wouldn't talk to us about this case or the hospital's overall record with the state. In an email, a spokesperson wrote this about the Modesto Hospital. We will continue to focus on our safety practices and train rigorously to make sure we provide our patients with safe, quality, affordable care. Another state report on Rideout Memorial Hospital in Marysville. In September 2011, 2 nurses state that a patient is being admitted with right hip pain and needs surgery to repair a fracture. During surgery, after her right hip was already opened up, the surgeon discovers he was supposed to be operating on the left hip.
I figured eventually they were going to get caught sooner or later.
This nurse resigned from Rideout last year because of what she described as a pressure cooker where nurses have so many patients they sometimes have to cut corners to get their work done. She agreed to do an interview with us if we concealed her face, changed her voice, and kept her name secret.
There's been plenty of times where you see the mix-ups. And I get it, it's human nature, we all make mistakes, but when someone's life is in your hands, you definitely need to be a little more thorough.
Rideout agreed to do an interview with us to talk about all of these issues. But the night before the interview, the new CEO backed out. Why? Because we dared to contact current and former employees to ask them about the health code violations here.
In a written statement, Rideout's interim CEO said, "We are no longer looking back on earlier deficiencies, but moving Rideout forward to providing high-quality patient care." Over the past 4+ years, the California Department of Public Health has substantiated 115 patient care incidents at Rideout. Memorial Medical Center in Modesto has even more, 154. Our research found more than 1,000 incidents at the hospitals in our area where patient safety was an issue.
It shakes me to the core, and it shakes others, and it shakes the public to the core. We're entitled, as members of the consumer public, to trust our doctors.
As for its part, the California Department of Public Health refused to sit down with us and do an interview. Even after we gave them a 2-month window and told them to pick the day and time, a department spokesperson said no one would be available.
Tonight, 10 takes on the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department and questions about high-tech surveillance equipment.
Now, they assured us the device known as Stingray is not being used here. But News 10 investigative reporter Thom Jensen has new evidence suggesting otherwise.
When you dial up or text a friend, or surf the internet using a mobile connection, that cell tower you think you are connecting to might not really be a cell tower. It could be a police or sheriff department Stingray.
It's essentially a fake cell phone tower.
Hani Fakori has been fighting to protect Californians from invasive surveillance techniques for more than a decade.
We've been assured and promised that they're not being used in that way, but we don't really know for sure.
The Stingray is mobile, and it can capture all data from anyone who connects to it. In doing so, critics say the Stingray creates a problem of illegal searches and Fourth Amendment violations.
The California courts have not weighed in on the proper framework for how the police should be using these devices.
News 10 filed public records requests with all local police and sheriff's departments in California asking whether they use the fake cell tower devices. And we found Oakland has one, so does LA, San Francisco, and San Jose. A total of 6 communities admit they have them. But the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department told us it does not own or use Stingrays and has no records responsive to our request.
The Sacramento Sheriff has an obligation to respond under the Public Records Act. If they're withholding something from you, they should tell you that they're withholding and what the basis for it is.
Certainly they shouldn't be lying about it, saying that they don't have it when they do.
Peter Scheer is with the First Amendment Coalition and promotes open government and access to public records. Scheer is concerned about our records request in Sacramento because we showed him documents from other law enforcement agencies who applied for grants to buy Stingrays.
That's where we found out the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department might in fact be using a Stingray device despite its responses, especially in these records from San Jose Police.
San Jose PD said they did extensive research and contacted police agencies in California that utilize this type of technology, and that the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department was one of them. We also obtained this receipt from Sacramento County showing the Sheriff's Department paid more than $11,000 for a piece of equipment sold by the same company that makes stingrays. It acts like a filter and amplifier for stingray-type devices. And recently, after we were armed with that new information, the Sheriff's Department modified its response, telling us in an email the Sheriff's legal counsel is coordinating a response to our questions.
You don't know whether that means, in fact, no responsive records exist, or there are no responsive records that do exist that we're willing to give you.
Or maybe that response will be, well, sorry, we misled you. We do have the technology, but I guess that's another issue. But still, this technology, it could snare totally innocent people. They're just not listening in to the bad guys that they're after. Anybody could be logging onto this.
And that's the Fourth Amendment issue here. It's the illegal search and seizure. That's what the Fourth Amendment says. You can't just cast a wide net over everybody and start pulling in information or going door to door in somebody's apartment building looking for somebody, knocking down the doors of everybody to find one person or to find out if other people are committing crimes.
You know, unlike a new vehicle or some other piece of equipment, law enforcement agencies do not advertise that if they do indeed have this. Is there a perception by some law enforcement agencies that there could be a constitutionality problem with this piece of equipment, so they just try to keep a low profile?
Well, I don't know if they feel that there's a constitutional problem here, but I do know that they're being very secretive, and one of the reasons might be is that the company that makes these, the Harris Corporation, makes them sign a non-disclosure agreement. So they're told that they can't talk about these things. Even when we get these documents, when we're able to, they're heavily redacted. There's hardly any information in there. The problem is you can't have a non-disclosure agreement that just supersedes the California Public Records Act.
Well, and when you go to court with evidence that they obtained with this device against the bad guy, they have to tell how they got that evidence. So it's going to come out sooner or later unless they make an effort to mislead the court on how they got the evidence.
Say they got it from a confidential informant who you don't have to give the name of. You know, it just leaves it open for a lot of abuse because there is no third-party oversight from the beginning.
All right.
Okay. We know you'll continue to follow it. Thank you very much, Tom.
And we'll see the response we get. Yeah, Tom, thanks. The technology is called a stingray, and it can collect data from your cell phone, even when you are not the target of a criminal investigation.
Our investigative team exposed how local law enforcement agencies have been using the spy technology for years without the public's knowledge. Investigative reporter Thom Jensen trying to get answers from Sacramento County Sheriff Scott Jones.
After numerous refusals to speak with News 10 about his department's use of a high-tech surveillance device called a stingray.
We've dealt with your incessant badgering of our department over these issues.
This is a privacy issue.
We were forced to find Sheriff Scott Jones in public.
Hey, Sheriff. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Doing very well.
I'm Thom Jensen with News 10. We wanted to talk to you about your use of stingrays.
We contacted Jones before a recent Sheriff's Academy graduation, and when we asked him about stingrays, his demeanor changed.
Are you proud of disrupting an Academy graduation?
That's why we were talking to you before.
This is why we are so concerned about who uses stingrays and how they use them. Stingrays are traveling cell towers controlled by law enforcement agencies. They are so powerful, they force all cellular devices in up to a mile radius to connect to them. And they can download all of the data coming into and going from the phones and tablets connected. It's a real concern for civil rights groups who say police and sheriff's departments use this spy technology and refuse to divulge how or even if they use it.
There's a lot of secrecy about the use of these devices.
Hani Fakori is the head of a nonprofit group trying to stop the use of high-tech surveillance equipment on large groups of people, especially when that surveillance is done without judges' approval and defense attorneys being informed.
We've been assured and promised that they're not being used in that way, but we don't really know for sure.
During our investigation, it became clear the Sacramento Sheriff's Department couldn't get its story straight about using stingray technology.
Originally, it gave us an invoice from the maker of the device, the Harris Corporation, showing the department bought a high-powered antenna that extends the range of stingrays. Then it said, quote, "This technology comes with a strict non-disclosure requirement. It would not be appropriate for us to comment." And finally it said, more documents from the Harris Corporation, quote, "exist that were not disclosed." The department's attorney said the sheriff didn't have to give us the records and cited all sorts of public records exemptions. including a state law written to protect railroads.
We fully comply with the Public Records Act. We've given you documentations that were responsive.
Well, one of the quotes from the attorney was something that had to do with rail safety, which has nothing to do with stingrays.
Are you proud of disrupting an academy graduation?
That's why we were talking to you before.
The secrecy about the devices starts with the Harris Corporation, which forces every agency purchasing a stingray to sign a non-disclosure agreement, which states the device's capabilities are not for public knowledge. The sheriff has been more secretive than others. We obtained Oakland Police Department records showing it used a stingray for all sorts of criminal investigations. And when the San Jose Police Department applied for a federal grant to buy a stingray, it said it consulted with the Sacramento Sheriff's Department about its use of stingrays.
We found that especially odd because the court administrator's office told us they asked every judge whether or not they approved warrants for the use of stingrays, and every single one said no. The district attorney's office told us the same thing. The sheriff's department never divulged it was using a stingray or a like device for any criminal investigation.
I also went through more than 1,000 warrant applications filed over the past 2 years at the Sacramento County Courthouse. Not a single one ever mentions the use of stingrays. There are a few for pen register or trap and trace warrants. Those allow agencies to collect incoming and outgoing numbers from a single cell device. But it's only from those designated devices, not from people in a wide area like a stingray does. And there are dozens more warrant applications which have been sealed with no explanation of why they are confidential or even which agency applied for them.
If you're using stingrays, I think there are some questions about that.
Then this interview can be over.
But the judges and the DA even said that they didn't know that you had one of these devices. Why is that?
I have nothing more to say to you.
We reached out to the sheriff's department after that interview and asked if he'd rather sit down and talk to us in a more formal setting, but once again, he declined to be interviewed. Dale and Christina?
You know, law enforcement officers and prosecutors usually work together as a team, and isn't it shocking that prosecutors and judges don't even know when the stingray is being used, in what cases?
And we can't say exactly what's going on here, but I can tell you there's a story out of Florida right now where there are accusations that the U.S. Marshal's Office has trained detectives there in Florida to basically say that they're using confidential informants when they're really using stingrays. And we do know that a lot of detectives here are cross-deputized with the U.S. Marshal's Office.
Well, you know, Tom, the Sacramento Sheriff's Department has been forthcoming with us in the past. I mean, they have lots of different kinds of equipment. Why deny the existence of the stingray? I mean, if the Harris Corporation says you can't say how it's used or exactly what it does, why deny its existence?
Look, we ran a story at 5 o'clock tonight, and I got a call from a local detective. I was able to verify his identity, and he said the problem here is that the sheriff's department and other local agencies don't want anyone to know about them because they're afraid the bad guys will know, and then they'll avoid using their cell phones, etc., you know, when they're talking about committing crimes.
But they know about wiretaps and other technology, and it does sound almost like, you know, it is a form of a tap, and that if they are going to be using it, a judge needs to sign off on it. But I'm sure there's more to come on this.
All right. Thank you very much, Tom.
Investigative reporter Thom Jensen shows us that story has one lawmaker demanding answers and asking new questions about how to protect your privacy.
It's a topic that has divided the country for more than a year.
But I, sitting at my desk, certainly had the authorities to wiretap anyone.
After former NSA analyst Edward Snowden told Americans we are being spied on by our own government. The president even got involved in the conversation.
Our liberty cannot depend on the good intentions of those in power. It depends on the law to constrain those in power.
We had our own questions about the Sacramento Sheriff's Department use of a cellular surveillance device called a stingray. Congresswoman Doris Matsui does too. She writes to News 10, quote, "Clearly, more information is needed and hard questions need to be asked about the possible use of stingray technology here in Sacramento and in communities across the country. We dug through 1,000 warrant applications and could not find a single instance where the Sheriff's Department asked the court for permission to use stingrays."
The judges and the DA even said that they didn't know that you had one of these devices. Why is that?
I have nothing more to say to you.
The sheriff has been secretive about his department's Stingray, denying requests for interviews and the department's Stingray purchase and training records. Stingrays mimic cell towers and force everyone in a certain radius to connect to them. They are then able to collect and store the data from all of those connected cellular devices. Congresswoman Matsui also told News 10, without proper oversight and transparency, it is impossible to ensure it is not being abused and Americans' right of privacy is not being unduly infringed. Law-abiding citizens should not have their location, phone calls, and text messages indiscriminately tracked by local law enforcement agencies. Also in response to our story, Congressman Ami Bera told us in an email, law enforcement at all levels has to be more transparent about its use of surveillance technology. In the newsroom, Thom Jensen, News 10.
And we asked the sheriff for a response to the Congresswoman's comments, but the sheriff has not yet gotten back to us.
But the judges and the DA even said that they didn't know that you had one of these devices. Why is that?
I have nothing more to say to you.
News 10 kept the pressure on in our search for the truth about the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department's use of a cell phone surveillance device called a Stingray. And today, an admission from the sheriff. The News 10 has already revealed evidence that the Sacramento Sheriff's Department is using a Stingray or a similar device, despite the sheriff's refusal to release any records about its purchase of a Stingray. News 10 investigative reporter Thom Jensen was finally able to get some of those records earlier this week after our lawyers got involved. And Tom, this has to be startling news for prosecutors and judges and defense attorneys. They told you they had no idea that the Sheriff's Department would be using this type of device.
That's right. We asked them several times, and prosecutors told us the sheriff never told them that his department is using a Stingray or like device, and court administrators said no judges were ever informed about its use either. But it's especially shocking for defense attorneys who told us this information was never shared with any of them in any criminal case.
Then this interview can be over.
Sacramento County Sheriff Scott Jones became upset when questioned about his department's use of a device called a Stingray. This week, we received a heavily redacted invoice from the sheriff showing his department purchased items totaling more than $240,000 from the maker of the Stingray in 2006. The portable technology, controlled by law enforcement agencies, mimics cell towers and forces every cell device in a certain radius to connect to it.
I don't mean to be disrespectful, sir, but I have to be an advocate for people's privacy rights. You guys are using a device that's all-encompassing. It sounds like a general search, a Fourth Amendment violation.
Is there a question in there?
We had a lot more questions about Stingrays that the sheriff would not answer. But in a statement released on his department's Facebook page today, the sheriff said the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department currently possesses and utilizes such a device, which is a cell site simulator. The device is used to locate a person's known cellular device pursuant to and in full compliance with the law. Privacy and civil rights groups say the equipment can be configured to gather any information shared through the fake cell towers.
I think that most attorneys in the government and most judges acknowledge this is in fact a search.
Mark Reichel has defended people in federal and state criminal cases for more than 20 years. He says he has been keeping his eyes on the NSA-type surveillance equipment, but had no idea the sheriff had been using the technology for 8 years. And he says he has not heard of a single case where prosecutors or the sheriff's department admitted they used a Stingray in their investigations.
If this was in violation of the law, which I believe it is, then yes, all the evidence should be thrown out.
We reached out to the sheriff again today to talk about his statement, but we did not hear back from his department, which has routinely refused to work with News 10 since I asked him those tough questions about a month ago. It has been systematic, too. Denials for interviews and information on stories that have nothing to do with Stingrays. Even today, when he released his statement in a press release, he sent that press release to every news outlet but us.
Yeah, and there's been a little blackballing of late going on with the sheriff's department. I want to ask you about a recent Supreme Court case having to do with cell phones. When someone is picked up and their cell phone is taken off them, police may not search that cell phone. The Stingray can essentially do that without them even arresting you or picking you up.
That had to do with people who were pulled over saying that police couldn't just scoop up your cell devices without a warrant and then start searching through them. But this would hold true in this case as well. I went through 2,000 different warrants filed in the Sacramento Superior Court. Couldn't find one where the Sheriff's Department said that it was using a Stingray or a like device when it went out to get a warrant. So, and like I said, prosecutors and judges said that they never heard about this device being used either.
I think the most disturbing part of this, I mean, I've been at News 10 for almost 20 years. I've known Scott Jones a long time. Good man. Worked under John McGinnis, another good man. Has been the most transparent of law enforcement agencies. But I think what bothered me about this story, and continues to do so, is that this is the federal government telling our local elected officials, you may not talk about this.
Well, that's what we're being told today. The Sheriff's Department said that, in fact, in his statement, he said that they were forced to sign a confidentiality or non-disclosure agreement with the federal government. We have also requested that non-disclosure or confidentiality agreement, but we haven't heard back from them. I'd like to see that. We do know that they signed a non-disclosure agreement with the Harris Corporation, which makes the Stingrays. But you're right, this is a little bit different. This is the federal government possibly saying what your local law enforcement agencies can and cannot release.